I'm Braden, 32 years old, and I never thought my own parents would put a price tag on raising me. That emergency family meeting they called last month was supposed to be about my dad's retirement. Instead, they slid a manila envelope across the dining table. Inside was a meticulous invoice, $230,000 for parental services rendered. My father's words still echo, "You owe us for the life we gave you." What they didn't know was that I'd discovered their secret just days before. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from, and hit subscribe to hear how I expose the truth. Growing up in suburban Michigan, I had what most would consider a normal middle-class upbringing. My father, Richard, worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm, while my mother, Carolyn, taught mathematics at the local high school. Our house was modest but comfortable, nestled in a neighborhood with decent schools and safe streets. From the outside looking in, we were the picture of American suburban normalcy. But there was always something slightly off about how my parents approached money. Every purchase required extensive research and comparison shopping. Birthday and Christmas gifts came with subtle reminders of their cost. My allowance wasn't just given, it was earned through an elaborate system of chores and academic achievements that my father tracked in a spreadsheet. Financial responsibility wasn't just a value in our household, it was practically a religion. Money doesn't grow on trees, Braden. My father would lecture whenever I asked for something. Everything in life has a cost, and you need to understand its value. My mother would reinforce these lessons with practical applications. Do you know how many hours your father had to work to pay for those basketball shoes? She'd ask, making me calculate the cost against his hourly wage. My maternal grandparents, Edward and Eleanor, lived about 3 hours away in a wealthy Chicago suburb. They had built a successful chain of hardware stores across the Midwest, which they sold for a substantial sum when I was around 10 years old. Despite their wealth, our visits were infrequent and formal. There was always tension between them and my parents, though as a child, I never understood why. "Your grandparents think money solves everything," my mother would mutter after our visits. They never understood the value of earning your own way. I remember my grandfather slipping me $20 bills when my parents weren't looking, winking as he pressed the crisp notes into my palm. "Don't let your father put all of this into that college fund," he'd whisper. "Buy yourself something fun." When my grandparents passed away during my junior year of college, I was devastated. I attended the funeral, but between exams and my internship, I wasn't involved in any of the estate matters. My parents handled everything, and I assumed that was that. They mentioned vaguely that my grandparents had left most of their money to various charities, which didn't surprise me given their philanthropic interests. After college, I built my own career as a financial analyst for a renewable energy investment firm. The irony of my profession isn't lost on me now, considering what would later transpire. I was good with numbers, understood market trends, and helped clients make sound investment decisions. I prided myself on my ethical approach to finance, something I thought I'd learned from my parents. As I established my career and independence, my relationship with my parents grew increasingly strained. Our conversations became almost exclusively about money, what I was earning, how much I was saving, when I would buy property instead of wasting money on rent. Every life decision I shared was met with a financial critique rather than emotional support. "You're taking a vacation to Costa Rica? That money could be going toward a down payment," my father would say. "That promotion only comes with a 5% raise? You should be negotiating harder," my mother would add. I chalked it up to their generation's anxiety about financial security. They had lived through recessions and watched their own parents struggle. Their concern, while annoying, seemed to come from a place of care. Then, about 2 years ago, their behavior shifted. My parents suddenly upgraded their lifestyle dramatically. They sold their modest home and purchased a lakefront property. My father retired early from his accounting job. They bought a boat and began taking luxury cruises. When I asked about this surprising change, they mentioned vague investments that paid off and careful retirement planning. "We've been frugal our whole lives for this exact reason," my mother explained. "Now we get to enjoy the fruits of our labor." I was happy for them, if a bit confused by the sudden change. I never questioned the source of their newfound wealth. Why would I? They were my parents, and I trusted them completely. 3 weeks ago, I received a text message from my father. Need to have an important family meeting this weekend. Please come to the house at 2 p.m. on Saturday. Urgent family business to discuss. The message struck me as odd. My parents weren't the type for dramatic family meetings. I called to ask what was going on, but my father was evasive. It's better discussed in person, Braden. Just be here on Saturday. I agreed, assuming perhaps they wanted to discuss their will or some health concern. I had no idea they were about to present me with an invoice for my existence, or that this meeting would unravel the web of lies they'd been spinning for years. That Saturday afternoon, I pulled into my parents' new driveway. Their lakefront property still felt foreign to me, nothing like the modest split-level home where I grew up. A Mercedes and a BMW sat parked in front of the 3-car garage. The sight of these luxury vehicles still jarred me, so out of character for the frugal parents I knew. My mother greeted me at the door with a tight smile and a brief hug. "Your father's waiting in the dining room," she said, leading the way through their expansive foyer. The house smelled of the lemon furniture polish my mother had always used, that familiar scent now oddly out of place among the high-end furnishings. The formal dining room was set up like a business meeting. My father sat at the head of the table, a leather portfolio and several folders neatly arranged before him. He wore a button-down shirt, pressed khakis, and the serious expression I recognized from childhood disciplinary talks. "Braden, thanks for coming," he said, not rising to greet me. "Take a seat." I sat across from my mother, feeling suddenly like I was at a job interview rather than a family gathering. No snacks, no coffee offered, none of the usual parental inquiries about my life or work. "We've been meaning to have this conversation for some time," my father began, clearing his throat. "As you know, your mother and I have always emphasized financial responsibility." I nodded, uncertain where this was heading. "We've been doing some life accounting, you might say, as part of our retirement planning," he continued, opening one of the folders. "And we realized there's an outstanding matter that needs to be addressed." My mother jumped in, her tone clinically detached. "What your father is saying, Braden, is that we've calculated the total investment we made in raising you." "Investment?" I repeated, confusion mounting. My father slid a manila envelope across the table. "This itemizes everything. Education, healthcare, housing, food, clothing, extracurricular activities, transportation, even your portion of family vacations." With mounting disbelief, I opened the envelope and pulled out what appeared to be a professional invoice, complete with my parents' names at the top, like a company letterhead. Line after line of expenses stretched down the page, categorized by year and type. Private baseball lessons, $3,400. Portion of household utilities, ages 0 to 18, $24,300. College application fees, $1,200. Emergency room visit for broken arm, $4,750. The total at the bottom, highlighted in bold, $230,000. "Is this a joke?" I asked, looking between them. "This is no joke," my father said sternly. "This represents our financial contribution to your upbringing, plus modest interest since you turned 18. We're not asking for immediate payment," my mother added, as if this were a reasonable clarification. "We've prepared several payment plan options." She pushed another paper toward me, showing monthly installment plans ranging from 5 to 15 years. "You can't be serious," I said, feeling like I'd stepped into some alternate reality. "You're billing me for raising me? For doing what parents are supposed to do?" My father's expression hardened. "That's a very entitled perspective, Braden. Nothing in life is free. You owe us for the life we gave you, for every opportunity we provided. We sacrificed everything for you," my mother added. "Vacations we didn't take, promotions your father turned down to attend your games, the career I put on hold. All so you could have the best start in life." I stared at the invoice again, noticing they'd even included interest calculations. What brought this on? Why now? My parents exchanged a glance I couldn't interpret. "We're simply settling accounts," my father said, "making sure what's rightfully ours is recognized." Something in his phrasing caught my attention. what's rightfully ours. A strange way to describe money spent raising your child. We expect you can make the first payment next month, my mother said. Your financial situation is stable, and this shouldn't cause undue hardship given your salary. I felt sick to my stomach, unable to process what was happening. The parents who raised me were now treating me like a delinquent debtor. I need time to think about this, I managed to say, folding the invoice and putting it back in the envelope. Don't take too long, my father warned. We've been more than patient already. I left their house in a daze, the manila envelope feeling impossibly heavy in my hands. In my car, I called my best friend Mason, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. They did what? Mason exclaimed after I explained. That's the most messed up thing I've ever heard. They can't legally make you pay for raising you. I know, I said, my voice breaking. But why would they even do this? What happened to my parents? I don't even recognize them anymore. Something's not right, Mason said. This isn't normal behavior, even for parents as financially obsessed as yours. There's more to this story, Braden. He was right. And little did I know, I was about to uncover just how deep my parents' deception went. Mason's words stayed with me as I drove home from my parents' house. Something wasn't adding up. The dramatic lifestyle change, the sudden obsession with getting what's rightfully theirs, the meticulous invoice covering my entire childhood. This wasn't just weird, it felt calculated. The next day, I called my Aunt Deborah, my father's sister. We weren't particularly close, but she had always been kind to me, and more importantly, she had never gotten along with my parents. If anyone would give me an unfiltered perspective, it would be her. Aunt Deborah, I need to ask you something about Grandpa Edward and Grandma Eleanor, I said after our initial pleasantries. Your mother's parents? What about them? Did they leave everything to charity when they died? That's what my parents told me. A long pause followed. Is that what Richard and Carolyn told you? Her tone had changed completely. Yes. Why? That's not true? Braden, your grandparents left the majority of their estate to you, not to charity, and certainly not to your parents. They set up a trust that you were supposed to receive when you graduated college. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Are you sure about this? Absolutely certain. Your grandfather told me himself before he passed. He was worried about your parents trying to control the money. That's why he set up the trust with specific terms. My mind raced to process this information, but I never received anything. No one ever told me about a trust. Your parents were named as trustees until you reached the designated age, Aunt Deborah explained. They would have had control of the funds until then. Braden, how old are you now? 32. Then, you should have received control of that trust years ago. It was set to transfer to you at 25. I felt sick. Could my parents have actually stolen my inheritance? I didn't want to believe it, but the timing of their lifestyle upgrade suddenly made terrible sense. How much was in the trust, Aunt Deborah? Do you know? Your grandfather mentioned over $1 million. He and your grandmother sold their business for quite a sum, and they wanted you to have financial security. $1 million. The room seemed to spin around me. My own parents had potentially stolen $1 million from me, and now they were trying to extort more with this ridiculous invoice. I thanked my aunt for the information and promised to keep her updated. Then I began my investigation in earnest. First, I searched county records for information about my grandparents' estate. The initial probate documents were there, but many details were sealed or missing. A week after the invoice meeting, my mother called asking if I could help them move some boxes from their attic to make room for a home renovation. Despite my suspicions, I agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to potentially find more information. While carrying boxes of old tax documents to their garage, I noticed a weathered lockbox partially hidden behind some Christmas decorations. Making sure my parents were occupied elsewhere, I quickly picked it up and found it unlocked. Inside were documents I recognized as legal papers, including what appeared to be copies of my grandparents' will and trust documents. I snapped photos of everything with my phone before returning the box, my heart pounding with adrenaline and betrayal. Later that night, reviewing the photos, my worst suspicions were confirmed. My grandparents had indeed established a trust in my name, worth approximately $1.2 million. My parents had been named trustees, with explicit instructions to transfer control to me when I turned 25 or upon graduating college, whichever came later. I had graduated at 22 and was now 32. For at least 7 years, my parents had been misappropriating funds that legally belonged to me. The next day, I contacted Kyle, a law school friend who specialized in estate law. After explaining the situation and showing him the documents, his assessment was blunt. "This is clear-cut financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty," Kyle said. "As trustees, your parents had a legal obligation to manage these funds for your benefit and transfer control to you at the specified time. Instead, they appear to have converted the assets for their own use." "What are my options?" I asked. "You need to gather more evidence of how they've spent the money. Bank records, property purchases, anything that shows they've used the trust funds. Then you can pursue legal action to recover the assets and potentially press criminal charges for fraud." The idea of taking legal action against my own parents was almost unthinkable, but so was what they had done to me. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the calculated betrayal, the years of lies, and now this absurd attempt to charge me for my upbringing. I spent the next few weeks meticulously gathering evidence. I hired a financial investigator who specialized in forensic accounting to trace the money trail. Through public records, we discovered my parents had purchased their lakefront property around the same time they should have transferred the trust to me. They had also bought their luxury cars, invested in a vacation property in Florida, and made numerous large withdrawals that couldn't be traced through public records. Each new discovery felt like another stab of betrayal. These were my parents, the people who had lectured me about financial responsibility my entire life, who had made me account for every dollar of my allowance, who had criticized my spending habits well into adulthood. All while they were secretly spending my inheritance on luxuries they had convinced me they could never afford. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. My mother's sister, Aunt Patricia, contacted me after hearing from Aunt Deborah about my inquiries. "I have something you should see," she said, meeting me at a coffee shop near her home. She handed me an email printout. "Your mother sent this to me about 5 years ago, asking for investment advice. I think it confirms what you're suspecting." The email detailed my mother's plans for managing Braden's trust and explicitly stated their intention to use the funds for their early retirement. "He doesn't need to know about this money," my mother had written. "We sacrificed everything to raise him, and we deserve this after all we've done." With this final piece of evidence in hand, I knew it was time for a confrontation. My parents hadn't just stolen my inheritance. They had calculated and planned this betrayal for years. And now, with their retirement funds potentially running low, they were trying to squeeze more money out of me with their outrageous invoice. I scheduled another family meeting with my parents, but this time, I would be the one bringing the documentation. The time had come to expose their theft and demand accountability. With evidence mounting and my anger building, I knew I couldn't rush into confronting my parents. This needed to be strategic, not emotional. If I wanted any chance of recovering my inheritance, I had to approach this methodically. First, I consulted with Marissa, a financial forensic expert recommended by Kyle. She helped me trace the path of funds from my grandparents' estate through various accounts and investments my parents had established. "They were clever," Marissa explained, pointing to a complex flowchart she'd created. "They moved the money through several accounts to obscure the source, but the timing matches perfectly with their major purchases. We discovered they had used approximately $800,000 for their lakefront property and renovations. Another $150,000 had gone toward luxury vehicles. They had spent roughly $200,000 on travel and leisure over the past 5 years, including a month-long European cruise and a safari in Tanzania. The remaining funds appeared to be in offshore accounts we couldn't access without court orders. "This is textbook misappropriation," Marissa said. "They've spent almost all of it on themselves, with no indication any was preserved for you as required by the trust." Next, I met with Kyle again to understand my legal options. He was direct about the challenges ahead. "You have a strong case for civil recovery," he explained. "But criminal charges would mean your parents could face prison time. Is that something you're prepared for?" I hadn't slept properly in weeks, torn between rage at their betrayal and grief for the relationship I thought we had. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I want my inheritance back, but sending them to prison." "You don't have to decide that immediately," Kyle assured me. "First step is confrontation and attempting to recover the assets without court involvement. If they cooperate, criminal charges might not be necessary." We developed a legal strategy with several options, from full prosecution to negotiated settlement. Kyle prepared demand letters and drafted potential agreements for my parents to sign, acknowledging their breach and agreeing to repayment terms. The emotional preparation was harder than the legal planning. My friends Mason and Ellie became my support system, listening to my rants, calming my fears, and keeping me grounded when the betrayal threatened to overwhelm me. "You need to be ready for every reaction," Mason advised during one of our strategy sessions. "They might deny everything. They might break down. They might threaten you. You need to stay calm no matter what." Ellie, always the more pragmatic one, suggested role-playing potential scenarios. "I'll be your mom," she said. "Mason can be your dad. Let's practice how you'll respond when they try to guilt-trip you or deny everything." We spent hours rehearsing different confrontation scenarios. I practiced maintaining my composure when my parents became defensive, aggressive, or manipulative. Each practice session strengthened my resolve and prepared me for the emotional manipulation I knew would come. 2 days before the planned confrontation, I barely slept. I kept reviewing the evidence, refining my approach, and wrestling with the finality of what I was about to do. This confrontation would irrevocably change my relationship with my parents. There would be no going back. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" Ellie asked when I called her at 2 in the morning. "We could come with you, or at least wait outside." "I need to do this myself," I said. "But knowing you guys are just a phone call away helps more than you know." The night before the meeting, I carefully organized all my evidence in a black leather portfolio, much like the one my father had used for his invoice. I arranged the documents in a logical sequence. The trust documents first, then evidence of their misappropriation, followed by the legal consequences they faced. I also set up a recording device on my phone, which Kyle had assured me was legal in Michigan as long as one party to the conversation, me, knew about it. I didn't want to rely solely on my memory of whatever was said. That morning, I called my parents to confirm our meeting. "Have you made a decision about the payment plan?" my father asked immediately. "I'd like to discuss some options," I said carefully. "I'll see you at 2. As I hung up, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For weeks, I'd been cycling through shock, grief, and rage. Now, with my evidence gathered and my approach planned, I felt ready to face the truth and demand justice. I arrived at their house exactly on time, the black portfolio tucked under my arm. This time, I wasn't walking in blind or unprepared. This time, I knew exactly what I was facing. And this time, they would be the ones receiving an unwelcome financial surprise. I parked my car in my parents' driveway, taking a moment to steady my breathing before grabbing my portfolio and heading to the door. The lakefront property looked even more ostentatious now that I knew it had been purchased with my stolen inheritance. My mother answered the door, her smile tight and expectant. "Braden, come in. Your father's waiting in the study." I followed her through the house, noting all the expensive furnishings with new eyes. The abstract painting in the hallway that probably cost thousands, the designer furniture, the cutting-edge home automation system, all bought with money that should have been mine. My father sat behind a large mahogany desk, looking every bit the successful businessman rather than the modest accountant he'd been most of my life. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Braden, good to see you've had time to consider our proposal." I sat down, placing my portfolio on my lap rather than on his desk. My mother took a seat beside my father, forming a united front against me. "So," my father continued, "have you decided on a payment plan?" I maintained a neutral expression. "Before we discuss that, I have some questions about the invoice." "Of course," my mother said, her tone patronizingly patient. "We anticipated you might need clarification on some of the line items." "Actually," I said, "I'm more interested in understanding the timing. Why present me with this bill now, after all these years?" My parents exchanged a quick glance. "As we explained," my father said, "we're settling our accounts as part of retirement planning, making sure everything is in order." "That's interesting," I replied calmly, "because your retirement situation seems to have improved dramatically about 5 years ago. New house, luxury cars, expensive vacations. That's quite a change from the frugal lifestyle you maintained while I was growing up." My mother's smile faltered slightly. "We told you, our investments paid off. We worked hard and saved carefully for decades." "Yes, you mentioned that," I said. "But I've been wondering about another potential source of funds." I paused, watching their expressions carefully. My grandparents' estate, for instance. The change in the room was immediate and palpable. My father's posture stiffened, and my mother's hand moved to her throat, a nervous gesture I recognized from childhood. "What about your grandparents?" my father asked, his voice carefully controlled. I decided to be direct. "Did they leave me anything in their will?" "They left modest gifts to family members," my mother said quickly. "The bulk went to charities, as we told you." "That's strange," I said, opening my portfolio and removing the first document, "because I have a copy of their will and trust documents here, and they tell a very different story." I placed the papers on the desk between us. My father didn't reach for them, but I could see his eyes scanning the visible text. "Where did you get those?" he demanded. "That's not important right now," I replied. "What's important is what they show. That Grandpa Edward and Grandma Eleanor established a trust worth approximately $1.2 million. A trust specifically for me, which I was supposed to receive control of when I turned 25. My mother's face had gone pale. My father's jaw clenched so tight I could see a muscle jumping in his cheek. "These are private family matters," he said, pushing the papers back toward me. "Yes, they are," I agreed. "Private family matters like parents stealing their child's inheritance." "We did not steal anything," my mother interjected, her voice rising. "We manage those funds as trustees." "Trustees have fiduciary responsibilities," I countered, pulling out more documents. "They're legally obligated to manage the money for the beneficiary's benefit and transfer control at the designated time, not spend it on lakefront property and European cruises." I laid out bank statements and property records, showing the timing of their purchases coinciding with withdrawals from accounts linked to the trust. "You have no right to investigate our finances," my father said, his face flushing with anger. "And you had no right to keep my inheritance from me," I shot back. "But here we are." My mother attempted a different approach, her eyes suddenly welling with tears. "Braden, you don't understand what it was like raising you. The sacrifices we made. Your father worked 60-hour weeks. I gave up my chance at administration to be home for you after school." "I appreciate those sacrifices," I said, genuinely meaning it despite everything. "That's what parents do for their children. But it doesn't entitle you to steal over $1 million from me. We deserve that money," my father suddenly exclaimed, slamming his hand on the desk. "Do you have any idea what it cost us to raise you? The opportunities we gave up? The hardships we endured?" "About $230,000, according to your invoice," I replied coolly. "Convenient how that's just a fraction of what you took from me." My father's face contorted with rage. "You, ungrateful little. After everything we did for you." "Richard," my mother warned, placing a restraining hand on his arm. I continued methodically presenting my evidence. The email my mother had sent to Aunt Patricia, the forensic accountant's report tracing the misappropriated funds, the legal assessment of their breach of fiduciary duty. With each new document, their denials weakened. My mother began to cry in earnest, while my father's anger gave way to a calculating look I recognized from childhood negotiations over allowance increases. "What do you want, Braden?" he finally asked. "Money? Is that it? You want to bleed your own parents dry over some technical legal oversight?" "Technical legal oversight?" I repeated incredulously. "You stole my inheritance, spent it on luxuries for yourselves, and then had the audacity to bill me for raising me. This goes beyond a technical oversight. We were going to tell you eventually, my mother tried. We just wanted to enjoy our retirement after all our hard work. When? I challenged. When were you going to tell me? After I'd paid you another $250,000 on top of the inheritance you already spent. Neither of them had an answer for that. I pulled out the final document from my portfolio, a formal demand letter prepared by Kyle. This outlines my terms. I want full accounting of all trust assets. I want recovery of all misappropriated funds, with interest. And I want a formal acknowledgement of what you did. My father scanned the document, his expression darkening. And if we refuse, then I'll pursue full legal remedies, including criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. The evidence is clear. You would almost certainly face prison time. You would send your own parents to prison? My mother gasped. Over money? This isn't just about money, I said, my composure finally cracking. This is about trust, about family, about the fact that you've been lying to me for years, stealing from me, and then trying to extort more money from me with this ridiculous invoice. If you do this, my father said, his voice dangerously quiet, you're no longer our son. We will cut you out of our lives completely. The threat should have hurt, but instead, it only confirmed what I already knew. I think you did that a long time ago, I replied. When you decided my inheritance was more important than your relationship with me. The most devastating revelation came as they began to realize they couldn't intimidate or manipulate me anymore. We planned for your future, my mother said desperately. We were going to help you buy a house, help with your future children's education. When? I asked again. After making me pay back the invoice first? After making me prove I deserved your help? You don't understand, my father insisted. We had a plan all along. The invoice was just to teach you responsibility. A plan that involved hiding my inheritance from me for 7 years while you spent it on yourselves? I shook my head in disbelief. That's not planning for my future. That's theft. I stood up, gathering my documents. You have 48 hours to decide. Sign the agreement, cooperate with the asset recovery process, and this stays a civil matter. Refuse, and I'll be forced to pursue criminal charges. This will destroy this family, my mother sobbed. I looked at her, feeling a strange mixture of pity and resolve. You already did that when you decided to steal from your own son. As I walked out of their house, I felt the weight of 32 years of lies and manipulation lifting from my shoulders. Whatever happened next, the truth was finally out in the open. The moment I got into my car after the confrontation, the adrenaline that had carried me through finally crashed. My hands shook so badly, I couldn't put the key in the ignition. I called Mason immediately. It's done, I said, my voice breaking. I confronted them. I'm coming to get you, he said, without hesitation. Where are you? Still in their driveway. I can't even drive right now. 20 minutes later, Mason pulled up behind my car. He drove me to his apartment where Ellie was waiting. They listened as I recounted the confrontation in detail, both of them expressing shock at my parents' reactions. I can't believe they threatened to disown you, Ellie said, handing me a cup of tea. After everything they did. I think I've been disowned for years, I replied. I just didn't know it. The next 48 hours were agonizing. My phone remained silent. No word from my parents. I stayed at Mason's place, unable to face returning to my empty apartment alone with my thoughts. On the morning of the deadline, Kyle called me. Braden, your parents' lawyer just contacted me. They want to negotiate terms. This was unexpected. I had been preparing myself for full legal warfare. What are they offering? They're willing to provide full accounting of the trust assets and return what remains, approximately $300,000. They're also offering to sign over the Florida vacation property, which would cover another $400,000. It was less than half of what they had taken, but it was also an implicit admission of guilt. And the rest? They claim the money has been spent, and they don't have liquid assets to cover it. They're asking for a payment plan for the remaining amount. The irony wasn't lost on me. Let me guess. Monthly installments over 5 to 15 years? Something like that, Kyle confirmed. What do you want to do? We could push for more, but litigation would be expensive and time-consuming, with no guarantee of recovering more than they're offering. I thought about it. Set up a meeting. I want to hear them say it in person. The meeting took place at Kyle's office 3 days later. My parents arrived with their attorney, a nervous-looking man who clearly recognized the weakness of their position. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother looked like she hadn't slept in days. Their lawyer presented their offer formally, couching the misappropriation in euphemisms like misunderstanding of trustee obligations and temporary allocation of assets for family benefit. Kyle dismantled these characterizations methodically. Let's be clear about what happened, he said. This was a clear breach of fiduciary duty and misappropriation of trust assets. We have documentation proving intent to conceal the trust's existence from the rightful beneficiary. The only reason we're discussing settlement instead of criminal charges is my client's reluctance to see his parents prosecuted. My parents flinched at the word prosecuted. Their lawyer cleared his throat. My clients are prepared to make substantial concessions to resolve this matter amicably, including an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, I added. I want them to admit what they did. That's not necessary for the settlement, their lawyer began. But my father interrupted him. It's fine, he said wearily. We'll acknowledge it. The negotiation proceeded from there. By the end of the meeting, we had agreed that my parents would 1. Immediately transfer the remaining trust funds, approximately $300,000. 2. Sign over the Florida vacation property. 3. Provide a promissory note for the remaining $500,000, secured by their primary residence. 4. Sign a formal acknowledgement of their misappropriation of my trust funds. As the lawyers finalized the paperwork, I found myself alone with my parents in the conference room for a few minutes. Why? I asked simply. Why did you do it? My mother couldn't answer through her tears. My father stared at the table. We convinced ourselves we deserved it, he finally said. After raising you, putting you through college, giving you every advantage. When your grandparents left everything to you and nothing to your mother, it felt unfair. You could have talked to me, I said. If you had just been honest about the inheritance and asked for help with retirement, I would have helped you. Would you have given us over $1 million? My father asked skeptically. Maybe not all of it, but I would have shared. That's what family does. The realization that they hadn't trusted me enough to even give me the choice hurt almost as much as the theft itself. When we signed the final settlement documents, my mother tried to hug me. I stepped back. This isn't forgiveness, I told them both. This is just resolving the legal issues. Will we ever see you again? She asked, her voice small. I don't know, I answered honestly. That depends on a lot of things. News of the settlement somehow leaked to extended family, and then to local media. The story was irresistible. Parents billing their son for his upbringing after stealing his inheritance. I declined all interview requests, but that didn't stop the story from spreading. Unexpectedly, 2 of my cousins contacted me after the news broke. They had received smaller inheritances from my grandparents, also managed by my parents as trustees. After hearing about my case, they reviewed their own finances and discovered discrepancies. With my encouragement, they pursued their own settlements. The recovery process was slow and painful. The Florida property took months to sell in a declining market. My parents made the first few payments on their promissory note on time, then began to fall behind, necessitating further legal action. 6 months after our settlement, I received word that my parents were planning to move overseas. Kyle immediately filed for an injunction, preventing them from leaving the country until the debt was satisfied, which required freezing their assets and placing a lien on their property. They're trying to run, Kyle explained when I expressed surprise. It's actually not uncommon in these cases. Once the initial shock wears off, people often try to escape the consequences. The final resolution came nearly a year after the original confrontation. My parents were forced to sell their lakefront home to satisfy the remaining debt. The court appointed a trustee to oversee the sale and distribution of funds, ensuring they couldn't hide or divert assets again. In the end, I recovered approximately $950,000 of my original $1.2 million inheritance. The rest had been spent or gone to legal fees and property value depreciation. The last time I saw my parents was in court for the final settlement hearing. They looked diminished somehow, stripped of the confident facade they had maintained throughout my life. As they left the courthouse, my father turned back briefly, meeting my eyes for a moment before walking away. I didn't know then if I would ever see them again. What I did know was that I had stood up for myself, exposed the truth, and reclaimed not just my inheritance, but my autonomy from their manipulation. The legal battle ended, but the emotional aftermath continued. For months after the final settlement, I struggled with my identity and place in the world. When your foundation is shattered, rebuilding takes more than legal victories. I started seeing Dr. Regina Hayes, a therapist specializing in family trauma. Our first sessions were mostly me raging about my parents' betrayal, cycling through disbelief, anger, and grief. What kind of parents steal from their own child? I asked during one particularly difficult session, and then try to charge him for raising him? Who does that? People who have fundamentally confused love with financial transaction, Dr. Hayes suggested. Your parents seem to have viewed relationships, even the parent-child relationship, as balance sheets rather than bonds of affection and trust. This perspective helped me begin to understand, though not excuse, their actions. My parents had reduced everything to monetary value, including their role as parents. The invoice wasn't just about getting more money. It was the logical conclusion of how they viewed our relationship. Slowly, I began rebuilding my life. The recovered inheritance provided financial security, but more importantly, I was free from the manipulative relationships that had shaped my understanding of money and worth. Mason and Ellie remained my strongest supporters, along with a widening circle of friends who showed me what healthy relationships actually looked like. We took a vacation together to the Grand Canyon, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off because my parents had convinced me it was financially irresponsible. To freedom, Mason toasted on our first night as we watched the sunset paint the canyon walls, financial and otherwise. I also connected with my extended family in ways I never had before. Aunt Deborah invited me for holiday gatherings, where I met cousins and second cousins who shared stories about my grandparents that my parents had never told me. Your grandfather was so proud of you, my great-uncle Thomas told me over Thanksgiving dinner. He used to carry your school pictures in his wallet and show them to everyone. These connections helped me understand that family legacy involves more than money. It's about stories, values, and relationships that transcend financial worth. As I processed my experience, I realized I wanted to help others who had been victims of financial abuse. I established a small foundation using part of my recovered inheritance, providing resources and legal support for people dealing with financial exploitation by family members. Working with the foundation introduced me to Jackson, who had experienced similar betrayal from his business partner. Our shared experiences created an immediate bond, and over time, our friendship evolved into something deeper. For the first time, I found myself in a relationship built on mutual respect and transparency, including complete financial honesty. It's amazing how different it feels to talk about money without manipulation, I told him, as we discussed moving in together and combining some expenses. Just straightforward planning without hidden agendas. That's because we see money as a tool, not as a measure of worth or love, Jackson replied, helping me articulate what I had been learning through therapy. 2 years after the confrontation with my parents, I received a letter from my mother. It sat unopened on my desk for weeks while I debated whether to read it. Finally, during a session with Dr. Hayes, I decided to open it. Whatever it says, Dr. Hayes advised, remember that your response is your choice. You can engage or not engage. You can forgive without reconciling. Your healing doesn't depend on their acknowledgement. The letter was surprisingly brief. My mother expressed regret, not just for taking the inheritance, but for the transactional way they had approached our relationship throughout my life. She didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation, just acknowledged the harm they had caused. I never responded directly to that letter, but it helped me release some of the anger I had been carrying. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't about excusing their actions or re-establishing the relationship. It was about freeing myself from the burden of resentment. My experience fundamentally changed how I view money and relationships. Growing up, I had absorbed my parents' anxious attachment to financial security, their equation of money with worth and love. Now I was learning to see money as simply a resource, not a measure of my value or others' affection. This shift transformed how I approached my career, my friendships, and my plans for the future. When Jackson and I discussed having children someday, we talked at length about how we would teach them about money. They'll never get an invoice for their childhood, that's for sure, I said, now able to find some dark humor in my experience. And if they receive any inheritance, they'll know about it right away, Jackson added. Perhaps the most profound change was in how I defined family. Blood relations had failed me in the most fundamental way, but the family I chose had supported me through the darkest period of my life. Mason, Ellie, Aunt Deborah, Jackson, even Kyle and Dr. Hayes had shown me what genuine care looks like. 3 years after the confrontation, I received news that my father had suffered a heart attack. The information came from Aunt Deborah, who maintained minimal contact with my parents. I sent a brief card but didn't visit. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt, though we might acknowledge the space where they once stood. The inheritance I eventually recovered provided financial security, but the experience gave me something more valuable: freedom from the manipulative patterns that had defined my upbringing. I learned to recognize the difference between genuine generosity and calculated giving, between healthy financial planning and anxious hoarding. The invoice my parents presented that day, so meticulously itemizing the cost of raising me, now sits framed in my office. Not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a testament to how far I've come in understanding that the most important things in life cannot be invoiced, tallied, or charged. If you've ever experienced betrayal by those who should have protected you, know that healing is possible. The path forward isn't about forgetting or even necessarily reconciling, but about reclaiming your story and your worth outside of others' valuation. What about you? Have you ever had to confront a painful truth about someone you trusted? How did you move forward? Leave a comment below sharing your experience or what you would have done in my situation. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share to help others who might be facing similar challenges. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is more valuable than the one we're born into. Thank you for listening to my story.